Welcome to the Nonprofit Edge, a podcast series to promote purpose in practice. Each week, this webinar series features an extraordinary individual that provides valuable and impactful services, helping to transform the capabilities of their nonprofit clients. Join us as we explore a variety of topics, all vital to the success of nonprofit organizations. Learn and grow from the experience and expertise of our featured guests. Without further delay, let's introduce you to the host of the Nonprofit Edge podcast series, Chris Looney.
Well, welcome everybody to the Nonprofit Edge, a podcast where we talk to experts in the field to help really elevate the understanding of nonprofit leaders out there around a variety of key and important topics. Today on the Nonprofit Edge podcast, I'm excited to welcome Jeffrey Wilcox, CEO of Third Sector Company and founder of the Interim Executives Academy. Jeffrey is a nationally recognized expert in nonprofit leadership transitions and the art of interim executive management. And through his work, he's guided countless organizations through critical periods of change, helping them not only bridge leadership gaps, but also emerge stronger and more strategically aligned. His insights into interim leadership, governance, and development management have shaped the field and inspired leaders across the sector. So welcome, Jeffrey. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks, Chris. What an introduction. I'm thrilled to be here.
It's a deserving one. We've known each other for a long time, and I'm super excited to dig into the topic of interim executive management, which in the nonprofit world can cover a lot of different roles. And I'll let you tell us all about that. But I would like to start with just a bit of your background. So if you don't mind, could you tell the listeners about how you came into this sort of work? I imagine it was from a background of nonprofit leadership yourself. Tell us a little more.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, Chris. The short story on me is, first of all, I'm the son of a newspaper publisher and reporter. So therefore, I was just brought up with curiosity. Curiosity is in my DNA.
Love it.
And when I graduated from college, I went to work for the United Way, and I served 3 United Ways. Most recently was the senior vice president of the United Way of Greater Los Angeles, and before that, the United Way in Phoenix. I also had the opportunity to be the executive director of a major children's hospital foundation in Southern California. And what I learned as I was on the fund distribution side of United Way as opposed to the fundraising. And Chris, there's one thing I learned very quickly being in the fund distribution business. There are some things that money can't buy. You can't write a check for some of the assets of our community's leaders who devoted their lives to these professions. So through the United Way, what I saw was the cost that nonprofits were paying due to a lack of succession planning, unpreparedness, bad terminations, that no funder could come to the rescue. And even more importantly, we're underpaying their executives so bad that they were under market that we couldn't even make an emergency grant to bring that position to at market so they could get a good candidate. I'm in this business because I was, first of all, distributing funds, and now what I see myself as a steward of assets.
That's amazing. That's awesome. Well, many of our listeners may not be familiar with the concept of executive interim leadership or interim executive leadership. Can you start by explaining what that is and why it's become such an important tool in the nonprofit sector?
Well, first of all, interim work is not a substitute teacher. I need to start by telling you what it isn't.
Yeah,
It's not feeding the dog, bringing in the newspaper, and watering the plants until the real director comes along.
Love it.
And it's not the substitute teacher. What this is, it is a purposeful intervention that's giving organizations pause. And it's a pause that is methodical. And it's profound because they want to build a bridge between their past and their future. And they're looking for someone to be a bridge builder as opposed to the next person figuring out what that should be. Here's how I describe it. The best interims help nonprofits figure out what they need in their next leader and get past what they want in their next leader. And that's what we do.
That's amazing. Well, there's obviously a question about when to seek interim support. So, what kinds of organizations or situations are best served by bringing in an interim executive? Are there certain warning signs or transition points that signal it's time to seek interim support?
Well, this is where there's the difference between interim executive management as crisis intervention
Okay.
and interim executive management as capacity building.
Okay.
So I want to take just a second, Kristen, and share the two differences.
Please.
On the crisis intervention side, there's a lot of organizations that will lose their leader quite suddenly, and they don't have a plan for what they need to do. Making a quick hire is probably, in our experience, not the best answer. Finding someone who can help in that crisis is a very good answer, and it can be an interim. But also, an interim can be extremely helpful when an organization is thinking about a merger or an acquisition, or it's going to be a short-term position. There's a variety of ways in which an interim can come into the picture because their successor is not set up for success.
Mm-hmm.
That's what an interim can do. Now, let me go to the capacity building side. Any organization that's doing well needs to figure out, okay, this is what we are. What do we want to be? Let's not rest on our laurels. Let's figure out, okay, we're at the top of our game. We've just lost our leader. Let's take a pause and see where we're really at and where we want to go so we can figure out what our next leader is. Chris, there will always be two types of interims. There'll be the crisis intervention interim because we have this unexplained vacancy. And there's the capacity building interim, which is more proactive, which is what we want to see happen.
Yeah. Well, it does sound like the individuals that are coming into these roles have some special skills and capabilities that maybe mere mortals don't have. I'm joking, of course, but I would love to know what the core skills and qualities are that make someone effective as an interim executive, and like how do those skills differ from the skills needed in a long-term or permanent executive role?
So I actually think there's four factors that really play into this. The first one is one of the core skills of an interim executive director is very aware of emotional intelligence. And part of the reason for that is an organization is going through change. By virtue of you being there, you're an organization that's in change. If you're not exhibiting a higher level of emotional intelligence about how change impacts people, I don't think you can be as effective.
Wow. Yeah.
Number two, you because you're there by design for a short-term basis, you have to lean into your facilitative leadership at a high level because you're facilitating some agreements that are going to be your legacy. They have to be owned by the people who remain, not be owned by the person who left.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're a really good interim, you exhibit good emotional intelligence and you are particularly heightened at facilitative leadership. Number three, you understand the hallmarks of good project management because the fact of the matter is, this is not your organization and you're not going to be there long enough. You understand the components of project management. And don't get me wrong, I don't look at interim leader as a project, but I will tell you when you approach your work from a project management standpoint, you will bring certain qualities to the job that set you apart from your successor who's not going to be short term. So you have a project management piece to it. And the fourth piece is you also have an ability to be forthright and speak truth. Interim executive directors often have to be able to say the things that people don't want to hear. And so there is a certain level of ability to speak tough love that's done in a way that does not create distance, but creates understanding. Those are the four.
Crazy. And they're so important.
Yes.
What do you find to be the hardest of those four skills to find in the interim executives that you've become aware of, that you've worked with, that you've placed, whatever, what's the hard one? What's the most difficult?
I think the most difficult, that's a really good question because a lot of people say, well, I've been a nonprofit leader for many years. I'll be a great interim. And I have to tell you, I think that's a bit of a myth because if you're used to being in a particular position for a long period of time, you cannot go into the interim position with the way in which you were.
Mm.
You now have to go into the position the way you are. And so I think the thing that's most difficult is for folks who are rather decisive and are more what I'll call an authoritative leader model. It doesn't work because you have to have the ability to get buy-in from people. That's a more facilitated process, so it becomes their answer instead of your answer, and then you leave.
Yeah.
You have to be much more concentrated on your legacy, I think, as an interim leader than you do as a long-term.
Hmm. Interesting. I wouldn't have
Because
guessed.
you're leaving. By design, you're leaving. For a lot of execs, I don't want to talk about my leaving. So therefore, my legacy is something I don't want to talk about. Well, as an intern, you got to talk about it from the day one because when you're hired, you're going to be leaving.
Yeah, no, that is quite an interesting difference when you're that long-term leader, whatever the position might be. You're fearful of that end date because it might not be of your own choosing. But when you're an interim, you're very focused on that end date because you need to get them to that objective as quickly as possible, with as much progress made, as possible as well, right?
That's exactly right. And so it's a difficult process. And one of the things that we teach interims is your second most important success comes from setting the expectations of what your deliverables will be. Because until an organization understands what an interim can deliver, they're probably going to expect you deliverables that they would expect from the successor. Well, our exec did this, our exec did that, our exec did this, you should do that. It's like, no, I'm your interim exec. And therefore, as your interim, the following things need to take place. It's a very unique set of deliverables and skills.
Right, right. That's good. There's a question that came to mind, and it was not one that I had anticipated asking, but it strikes me as being incredibly important. And that is, there's all these people that are being asked to work with an interim who are staff members. Many are legacy kind of employees, been there a long time, used to things being done a certain way. Others that are new and fearful or excited about this potential change. Um, what do you find employees need to know about an executive, and what do you see from employees? So I'm trying to put myself into the mind of an executive or a staff member who's having to work with a new person and it's not necessarily their choice. What happens in that dynamic? What should an employee think about this time or this opportunity? What should they be aware of?
That is such a great question. I think there's three pieces to that. The first one is we need to be very clear that the interim is an employee too. They are not a consultant. They are not a 1099. The same employee handbook, rules, and regulations guard their behavior just as much as everybody else's.
Interesting. Good.
Um, we do not subscribe to the fact that any interim should be a 1099. This is a temporary contracted employee position, and the people you work with follow the same employment rules that you do.
I love it.
That's critically important. Number two, the expectations of what the deliverables from the position is how you're going to be introduced. Hi, I'm Jeffrey Wilcox. I'm the chairman of the board of the organization, and today I want to introduce to you our interim, Chris Looney. And Chris, while he is here, is going to do the following 6 things. He's going to do he's going to make sure that we have a great audit. He's going to make sure that we have a campaign fundraising plan that is representative of the financial needs of the organization. He's going to help us put together a volunteer search committee that's going to have an equitable search process for the successor, and that goes on. but there's 6 deliverables. And so what we're doing here is we're not introducing the person. What we're doing is we're introducing the process and then the person that will lead it.
Mhm.
That's critical to getting buy-in, because you say to other employees, do you think this is what the organization needs right now? Not, is Chris the right person? That's a very different conversation.
Boy, is it.
So here is another employee that's being asked to do a series of processes. We're asking everybody to work with Chris to be able to do those processes. And number 3, we're all in a discovery to figure out what our shared reality and our shared future should be. Will you come on board? It needs to be extended as a participatory invitation, and not somebody has been brought in to be the substitute teacher to listen till the real person comes along. Until you figure out this is a real employee that has deliverables with an invitation to have great expectations, do I think you begin to get buy-in. There is a 4th one that we teach all our interims. You need to put together a cross-functional transition team, which breaks the silos of the organization to take these deliverables and look at it from an organizational point of view.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. That's helpful. And I know you've touched on it in some of the comments that you've already made, but I imagine that sometimes these interim executives are brought into very complex, challenging, messy, thorny type of situations, especially at moments of severe uncertainty or stress with the organization. And like, what does it take to stabilize the organization in those moments and inspire trust quickly? How does that happen?
It becomes from having an acute sense of when do I lead and when do I manage. And I will tell you, for interims, there are some issues that if they decide to manage them, the leadership of the organization will go out the door. One of the things that we subscribe to at the Academy, and why we're very proud of our alumni, is number 1, you have to have a list of consultants in your back pocket that if you have an HR issue, turn it over to the consultant. If you don't become a consultant while you're there. You have to be thinking about the overall organization. And so if there is a particular issue, Chris, that could preoccupy your entire leadership while you're there, you need to have a partner, or you will become the organization's consultant and the organization will have no leader.
Interesting.
One of the reasons why consultants don't always make the best interims is because consultants lean into their expertise,
Right.
and interims have to lean into their weakness, because it's their weakness that will be their Achilles heel.
Yeah.
If you are a fundraiser and you become an interim CEO, chances of your comfort level being in fundraising versus finance are pretty high. But if you continue to lean in fundraising during your entire time as an interim CEO, you spend 0 time in finance, it could cost you your job.
Yeah. Fascinating. I was thinking how relevant, just and tangential though, the idea is that leaders, when they get fixated on a particular issue, can become more consultant for the organization than leader of the organization, because they're spending all their time trying to fix that one thing. And I don't have an answer, right? Because I know there are leaders that have expertise and they enjoy certain elements of their role more than others. So they lean into those, they spend more time with those. But it is true that that can take your eye off the ball or the other 8 balls that you're supposed to also be focused on.
Right. It also, to your previous question, it also sends a message that some staff matter and some don't. And I think as leaders, we have to recognize that our focus on a particular function sends a message to the people who are staffing that function about their value and worth in the organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Were there any other elements that come to mind when you think about creating that stability, creating that quick trust?
Yes, you have to have a list of consultants. Number 2, We believe that you need a coach. Every interim needs a sounding board by another interim to say, this is what I'm facing and how would you do it?
Okay.
Um, it is a coached process. And so if you are an interim and don't have an interim coach, you are missing out on that extra set of eyes because nobody else in the organization understands your role. And if you don't have somebody sitting across from you who does, you don't have the check and balance that you're being the kind of quality interim you can be. So we are constantly training interims to also be interim coaches because we have to be there for each other. No one will understand this business if we're not helping each other to be the best at our brand.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it's interesting because I think there's maybe a time where having an interim signaled a failure of an organization, or failure of a process, a failure of something, and that's an unfair and untrue characterization of the need for interim executives. Am I correct? And how do you make that case?
So actually, Chris, we have discovered there are 11 kinds of interims, and I'm not going to waste your time going through all 11.
11. Oh
There's
my.
11. There's
Okay.
11. Um, but I think the point is helping organizations to understand what the organization needs from its leadership. And I'll give you one example that people don't think about.
Do it.
All volunteer nonprofits we think should have an interim leader before they actually hire their first executive director. Because if they've never had an exec before, I guarantee you their first exec is going to be an interim, better known as a sacrificial lamb, because the organization has never known how to function with true staff leadership before.
Super example.
Okay. So we have to look at what is best for the organization in finding its next chapter. And I think that interims really help with that. Now, we got two other things going for us. We are beginning to understand that corporations are also understanding the importance of fractional interim work than they ever have before. And these are the folks who sit on the boards of nonprofits.
Mm-hmm.
They're now starting to get some firsthand experience of what fractional interim work can do for organizations. You can't pick up any major daily in this country today and not Google or do a word search on the word interim and not find some public or private entity that is under the watchful eye of an interim. It would be impossible. So the policymakers are starting to see the value of this, and that's helping us a lot too, to figure out what is the best fit for an organization.
Good, good, good. Okay, let's talk about balancing change and continuity. How would an interim balance respecting that legacy of the organization, but also prepare it for its next phase under permanent leadership? It seems sometimes to be a difficult balance to strike.
So the first thing that we teach interims should do is, first of all, they have to create a strong sense of shared reality in an organization.
Okay.
And there's a variety of techniques to do that. But number one, part of our role in interim leadership is for everybody to understand what's truth. You know, where is the organization really at right now? Where is our mission statement in society? What does Giving USA 2025 say about us? What does, the really big budget bill say to us? It's a matter of what is our current reality. And then once there is consensus about that, then we say, okay, what's the best way to manage our reality and where we want to go as an organization? Part of the joy of this work is we have seen interims really help organizations to say, okay, I think we have served our mission. I think it's time for us to not rewrite our mission statement. It's time for us to have a new mission statement. And that's been so exciting to see. We've also seen organizations say our shared reality is when we look 3 to 5 years out from now, we're not going to be a viable, sustainable organization. We're just kidding ourselves. And so we should be, while we're healthy and strong, looking for a consolidation opportunity and not hiring an executive director to put themselves out of a job. When organizations have the opportunity to have shared reality to look at truth, to understand what their mission statement has said for its future, some real magic can happen. And that's the joy of why some of us are just going to be interims for the rest of our lives. It's a very joyful and exciting opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. I get that absolutely. I spent a lot of years working on capital campaigns, and there was a sort of defined start to objective, end date, and always working myself out of a job. and,
Sure.
and I loved it because I feel like I'm a entrepreneur, a builder, interested in creating something that hasn't existed before. And I'm not a steward. I'm more inclined to create something from scratch than I am to sort of pick up and carry forward something that needs to stay the same. So anyway, the interim roles, as you mentioned, are varied. You mentioned 11 different types. I don't know if then you need to multiply that by the different actual leadership roles that exist in a nonprofit. So, for example, if we're talking about being the executive director interim, or being the chief development officer interim, or the finance director interim, right? So there's all of these leader positions within a nonprofit where you can do fractional, you can do interim. But I wanted to start with the fundraising side or the development side because it's of interest to me. And it definitely seems like an area that's maybe gotten a lot of traction, hiring and finding interim development management. So how does that work differ? And what should organizations expect from it when we're talking about development or fundraising specifically?
So there is a difference between functional interim leadership and what I'll call executive.
Okay.
And part of it has to do with timing. We think that functional interims need a little more time in order to put things in place. Let's talk about fundraising. We created the Interim Development Bootcamp because the data we have right now from the Lilly School of Philanthropy is that the average tenure for a chief development officer these days is under 2 years. Any way you slice it, Chris, that's almost an interim by itself. When you think about fundraising as a relationship building organizational endeavor, if you have a development director who's coming in every less than 24 months, that's just never going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So this requires a intentionality to put into a function that will result in a sustainable, diversified portfolio of resources for the organization. And this is not about hiring a temp. This is about saying we're hiring a change agent to do the following. Number one, lower the level of attrition rate that's occurring in our development department right now.
Okay, good.
Number two, we're hiring a development person because we need to bring in the basics of understanding what good fundraising is and have that modeled so that when they leave, it will remain in place when they're gone.
So funny because you're talking about things that fundraising organizations wouldn't normally be talking about, because you led with sort of best practices and helping the organization be stronger in a function, as opposed to we need to raise more money, we need to have more donors, we need to have this event executed more perfectly, right? So you have a different approach. I imagine it leads to better fundraising results when it's successful, but it's not usually what people are starting the conversation with. I would imagine normally it's like, man, we need more money.
Yeah, that's called, you're looking for a windfall, and you're hoping your interim will provide that windfall. And our response to that is that's not what we do. What we're here for is we're helping your organization have a function that will be functional, that leads to a diversified, sustainable portfolio of resources for the long-term benefit of your mission statement. And with a revolving door in your organization of fundraising people, that's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
and with the disalignment of the board and executive and understanding their roles in successful fundraising, if that's not brought into alignment, you're leaving money on the table. Okay, so part of my role here is to create an alignment that hasn't been there. And we're not going to sacrifice another development officer to be a sacrificial lamb because that misalignment is not in place.
Yeah, I like that. I mean,
That's the truth I'm speaking about here, Chris. You need an interim development director who says, do not measure my worth by what I do while I'm here. Measure my worth by what's left in place when I leave.
yeah, good, good. I love that. There was a little smile, snicker, whatever you want to call it, when you first introduced the concept of the average tenure of a development professional as being less than 2 years, because that's a reality. We all know it. And now that means that the reality is that most every development hire is an interim hire. It's not a permanent hire. And just unfortunately, that's not what they've been hired to do. But the reality is it's an interim, and unfortunately, it is, because I know that we need to distinguish between the permanent people that are hired who become interims and the interim people that you place who do great work, who create more permanency for future employees, right?
So the homework assignment we gave at Interim Development Bootcamp today to folks who are studying this is you need to write out the outline of what an optimal interim development officer interview looks like. And you also need to decide what are the key messages that need to be delivered in that interview and not after you get the job. That's today's assignment for those folks. Because if we want to see attrition change, we've got to create and put in the hands of our successors the tools necessary for them to want to stay in those jobs, to find joy in those jobs, and for organizations who are embracing their development director as absolutely an important part of the future of that organization and not be a revolving door of beggars.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good, good. I want one more question around development. But then I also want to ask, don't let me forget, about how the development interim role would be substantially different from some of the other key interim executive roles that might be in the executive function or in finance, whatnot. But first, before that, tell me a little bit about the donor relations aspect of interim work during these transitions. What advice do you give interims about maintaining donor confidence, about engagement with donors? Because I imagine that's where things get a little bit tricky.
Mm-hmm. And so we're very clear that for an interim, it is a modeling process. And also that the executive director, we absolutely believe there has to be a functional resource development committee of volunteers and a board of directors. And all four of these components, the interim and their staff, the executive director, the development committee, and the board all have accountable responsibilities to build the trust of the contributing community and understand their role in it. And as an interim, I'm going to show you how that's done. But you can't be a spectator.
Mm-hmm. So that's the advice that you would give relative to the role of the board in ensuring interim executives are set up for success. It's you can't be a spectator.
If I'm on the board and I just announced that Jeffrey Wilcox is going to be our interim chief development officer, the response, whether I'm the executive director, the chairman of the board, or the chair of the development committee, is Jeffrey's coming in to do this work, but it is going to require all of us to get to the other side. Mm-hmm. And this is not a spectator sport.
And it's not entirely up to Jeffrey to make it rain.
That's correct, because I'll tell you the one thing we don't want to see is all those relationships go out the door with Jeffrey like everybody else who has preceded him.
Right.
That is not fiduciary or fiscal stewardship, in my opinion.
Yeah, agreed. It's great. And how are the development expectations of an interim different than, let's say, an executive, a finance person, HR, whatever positions you might be hiring for in that interim role? Are there? I mean, it sounds like there should be substantial differences, but are there commonalities? Like, how should we think about the differences in hiring interims based on the role?
So first of all, we understand there has to be operational excellence. This is not, you're not hiring a consultant. Somebody's not coming in and just kind of giving you their viewpoint on how it should be done. You got the job.
Or a playbook to tell other people what they should be doing.
Right. But the end game on this is we are building a fundraising function that is going to be successful for this organization and everybody who follows me. So therefore, I have goals and you have approved my goals and you're with me on these goals, that we've got to change this function if we expect change to occur. So therefore, there is not only operational management, but there is also change management that's occurring simultaneously. Or we're going to get the same results doing the same thing, expecting a different result. And you and I both know what that is.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right. Well, that kind of connects deeply into the succession planning question I wanted to ask, which is what organizations can really do today to prepare for smooth leadership transitions tomorrow so they aren't caught off guard when the need for an interim arises.
Well, succession planning is not a project. Succession planning is an organizational culture that says, we believe we owe it to the community. There's a continuity of leadership in place for this mission statement to remain vital and accessible, period. And so on the fundraising function, it's a matter of every single year talking with people about what they want to be, how we can support them, how people can stay with an organization. Chris, I will tell you, I think one of the great Achilles heels of succession planning is we have confused that with replacement planning. This isn't about replacing people. This is about having a continuity of leadership, which starts with keeping people and growing people. Organizations that are keeping and growing people have less succession planning issues.
Right.
When it comes to replacing people. And yes, that has to be in the succession plan. But it begins by asking our fundraisers, what is it that you need to excel at your position? And really listening to them and asking them what their future plans are. And making them feel like they belong in this organization and that they're not just there to be money collectors.
I love it. I love it. What a journey this has been in terms of our conversation. I wanted to close with a final kind of question, a personal reflection. And that's this. You've worked with so many organizations in and through transitions. What have you learned about leadership, about resilience, and the nonprofit sector from your unique vantage point?
So the truth is, in 22 years, we've helped over 900 nonprofits in 40 states. I'm very proud of that. And Chris, to answer your question, I have two responses. Number one, leaders have to understand that they're like doctors. Some were only meant to work in the emergency room, and some were meant to be primary care physicians. I have built an interim practice around finding leaders who are best in emergency rooms and giving them an opportunity to do that through interim leadership. If you look at their resumes, they're already interims. They're there for a couple of years and they move on. We're going to make that into a profession instead of a tendency. So my first I've learned is there are good long-term leaders and there are good short-term leaders, and every leader has to figure out what they're best at.
Amazing. Never heard that before. So thank you.
And I will tell you, if you're best at short-term leadership, do I have some opportunities for you?
Right. That's good.
Number two, understanding the importance of emotional intelligence cannot be underestimated. I can take all the management courses I want to, but nonprofits are about people who's had their hands and their hearts closely tied to a set of values. They want to see those values manifested in the lives of other people. This is not a robotic process. What I've learned about management is I can read all of the strategies that I want to. But until I truly understand and exhibit emotional intelligence, will I understand what true leadership in the sector is all about?
Awesome. Awesome. Well, call me impressed, Jeffrey. Thank you. This was awesome. I know, I mean, I learned a lot, and I know the audience did as well. And we're grateful for your time, your expertise, sharing your wisdom. This was so cool. And I hope that some of those emergency room leaders do reach out to you and get to know you better and get to know your organizations better. Because it's true. There are those that are truly cut out or built for long-term leadership assignments, and then there are those that are best suited for the short-term sprints and getting incredible things done, but in a different timeline, and having more of a variety in their leadership sort of experience. So, Jeffrey, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
My pleasure, Chris. Thanks for having me. What a compliment.
Yeah, you bet. And I'm looking forward to having you all back for the next episode of the Nonprofit Edge. Please like and subscribe. We also have our Mastering Fundraising podcast and our Lead for Good podcast. All of them have the same formula. Talk to some amazing people, learn from them, and be better positioned to do our work in an elevated fashion. So thanks again. See you all very soon.
Thank you for joining us for the Nonprofit Edge, a podcast series to promote purpose in practice. We hope you've enjoyed this presentation and learned some important lessons from our featured expert. We always want our content to be informative and to position nonprofit leaders to succeed. Please join us again for our next podcast. In the meantime, we wish you all the best and encourage you to learn more about Fulcrum Nonprofit Leadership by visiting our website at www.fulcrumleader.com.